All right, hello everybody. Or Rabbi Yitz is representing all of you today. Okay, so we are in Rishon and Beis Sif Gimel. We wanted to make up from last week's Marmar Kamos before we get to this week's Marmar Kamos. Just at least we'll talk a little bit about these things. Now, in the Beis Yosef and Rishon and Beis Sif Gimel, so Beis Yosef brings a list of Rishonim that asers everything in Bais Shel Yisrael, and no matter what's done in the Beis Yisrael is aser, and it's mashmos lashon Rishonim that the reason we're machalek between Beiso and Beiso Nachri is because of the svara of lo minkra milsa, that it's malachis Yisrael. When it's done in the Beis Yisrael, then it's minkra milsa b'shvil Yisrael. And when it's done in the Beis Nachri, it's not minkra milsa. It's not obvious that it's being done for a yid, and therefore we're makel. As long as, again, we're talking about katzatz, you gave him oris l'avdan or a beged to be done, or etc. So these things, it's kabbalanus with katzatz. That's the obvious hanacha over here. Now we have enough kamina where it's done in Beis Yisrael or in Beis Nachri, and the lashon of the Rishonim is that the nafkamina is mitzad minker and milsa. So the Beis Yosef has a suffix based on this that maybe it's possible to say, even if it's before something that it's Shel Yisrael, maybe you could say there's the pashas would be, since it's Talia and Minker and Milsa, then even the Beis Nachri it should be Aser when it's before some Shel Yisrael, because then you took away the non-Minker and Milsa by being in Beis Nachri. You sort of blew your cover, and now everyone knows it's Shel Yisrael, so it should be Aser. But he has a suffix about it, and wants to say that maybe there's a side to say that no, true, that's the foundation of the reason of the chiluk between the two is because of Minker and Milsa. Because generally speaking, there's enough community between Beis Yisrael and Beis Nachri by Minker and Milsa. But and therefore that's why they were gozer the Beis Yisrael, and they weren't gozer at all by Beis Nachri. But like we find many times in Chazal, in Durabanans, that once it was lo gozru, then then once they weren't gozer to begin with, then we can't make new gzeras. There's no room to make new gzeras. So it's possible to say that since there were lo gozru ela b'beis Yisrael and not b'beis Nachri, because generally speaking, b'beis Nachri it's not Minker and Milsa that it's shy to Yisrael. So then taka even if it would be meforsan in the Beis Nachri, somehow everybody would know that it's a shaykh to Yisrael, still lo gozru. That's the suffix of the Beis Yosef, and he wants to bring that that's really the das for Bnei Yerucham, like that it was lo gozru. We find this many different gezeras. We could go forever, but like that. Let's say I don't know, something like Maros Nashim. If you find a kesem on a beged sivoni, so even though it's Yosem Kegris and it's clear that it's done, but lo gozru, they weren't gozer on that, on a or davar she'ein makabel tuma, etc. So it could be as clear as day that it's talking about dam, but it doesn't matter. Lo gozru, that you can't make up new gzeras. So huadin over here, according to Bnei Yerucham, the Beis Yosef bringing that they weren't gozer but Beis Shel Nachri. But then afterwards he brings the Chuvas Arashba, the Gabe Chiptach Harava, that we're talking about a case of katzatz, and a goy was the Erev Shmini Atzeres, and Erev Erev Hoshana Rabbah actually, and so you need a lot of aravos. So the goy went and cut a lot of aravos on Shabbos right before the last day of Sukkot. There you need a lot of aravos, and obviously, why is he cutting aravos? Obviously for Jews. So it wasn't based on Yisrael, and so then it was the sparsam adavar, and a lot of people screaming about it that, well, how can you use aravos or cut on Shabbos? So, and some Rabbanim were takamachmer, but the Rashba came out and said that it's mutter because malachta asik, nobody asked him to do it, dafka on Shabbos, and it was katzatz just to have, no pun intended, it was katzatz by the aravos. And I thought that was actually funny that when I saw that, it was cut, that he cut it and it was katzatz. So then he says it's yafe lahachmir because of it's davar mefursam, and we have to be koshish for people thinking bad things about it. But in Ikar Din says Rashba that it's mutter. So it's interesting to now we can clear a shaila that according to the Rashba says it's mutter midina, is a pshat because he holds like Rabbi Yerucham, that they weren't gozer shalom beiso shel Yisrael, as long as it's katzatz, and then the only place they were gozer was beiso shel Yisrael. Now the goy went and cut it and the tree, his own trees or whatever. It's not, even though people might know it's going to be for Yisrael, but this is exactly the shiloh of the Beis Yosef before with the Yerucham, where they gozer at all outside of beiso shel Yisrael, even it becomes yedua. So from the Rashba, it seems like he's holding that way, that Mikra did it mutter because it was katzatz. Or maybe you could say differently. Maybe it's because really he had enough time to cut it before Shabbos, and he decided to do it on Shabbos. So then that's why it was totally in the hands of the goy. It's not totally clear it's because of Yerucham or not, but this seems to be a machlokes poskim because the Shulchan Aruch and Sif Gimel says that if im haisa malacha for semes yadua shehi shel Yisrael va'osa sabamacham beforsan tov lahachmir v'le'esar. Shulchan Aruch says it's a lashon tov lahachmir, which sounds like the Rashba says that since it's beforsan, people are going to talk about it. It's tov lahachmir. The words tov lahachmir clearly indicate Shulchan Aruch's paskein and Iker did its mutter. So it's being done again with katzatz lova beiso shel Yisrael, but it's never beforsan. So then, this is exactly the case where the Rashba said that it's mutter mikra din. It's just good to be machmir. Now so that seems to be the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. Everybody points out, the Magen Avraham points out that this seems to be a stira. Over here, the Baragola and the Gra say to take a look at Reish Samach Daled Sif Daled, but over there, we learned that already, the halacha of kever, that in Reish Mem Daled Sif Daled, that the Shulchan Aruch over there paskin like the Rambam, that the pshat and the sugya we had before of kever wasn't just a specific case of kever like Rashi learned, but it wasn't a special chomer by kever by kavura, but it was a general klal that anything which is meforsam, any malachas akam which is meforsam is davar aser. So even by cases where it should be mutter because you have katzas and everything, but it became a davar meforsam, like the kever that was done. Everyone knows it's for a Jew and everything. So it's aser l'olam with a special chomer of l'olam because the farhesia, the pirsum, makes it aser mikra din. It becomes like karka. The whole reason karka was aser mikra din is because karka always the standard, the default case by karkas is davar meforsam. So that's similar. Karka will be also learned from kever, from that klal of kever in the Shulchan Aruch over there paskin. So it seems to be a steer in Shulchan Aruch. Over there in the Beis Mem Daled Sif Daled, he paskins aser mikra din. Here he's paskening and it's mutter mikra din. It's just a it's tov l'hachmir.
Can we be machalik with the idea of kablanas and katzatz? Seems like over there that the guy was just doing it on his own, so it could be that he was doing it for like more of a gesture for the Yisrael mamesh, but over here he's being paid and there's an amount that he's being paid for. Shouldn't that be enough to be machalik the two dinim?
Yeah, so the poskim assume that over there was also katzatz, and they're all assuming that everything's equal. So the only chiluk we find, the Magen Avraham speaks about this in Sifkat and Yud. He goes back and forth about this stira, and so he wants to say that maybe the difference is where if it's before it's nicker that it's a malacha shel Yisrael, that's also mikra din, but if the actual malacha that's being done is not nicker shel Yisrael, it became a forsam that it's shel Yisrael. But it's not mineu bay within the malacha nikr that shel Yisrael. That's only also mitam chomer, not mikra din. That's what he wants to say. Is a possible chiluk that everyone knows that. Let's say the kever is here in Sif Gimel is not talking specifically about the aravas, even though later on in Hilchos Sukkah he talks about in Hilchos Lulav he talks about the aravas case. Here he just talks in general. That the Magen Avraham wants to say that here the general case of the Shulchan Aruch will be where it's became a forsam shel Yisrael, but the malach itself is not obviously shel Yisrael. In other words, let's say he's the goy is washing your clothes at the riverside, and it's just regular clothes. It could be anybody's clothes, but just people found out that it's Shal Yisrael. That's different than if he's washing a talis or a frock that obviously belongs to a Jew. Minei Ubeya belongs to a Jew. That's the chiluk Magen Avraham wants to say. But at the end, Magen Avraham goes away from that chiluk and holds that really it's the same case from the Makaros of the Shulchan Aruch in both places. It's really the same makor, and it just remains a stira in Shulchan Aruch. And the Mishnah Berurah brings down also. He goes with the stira. He alludes over here to look at the Bir Halacha there, and back there, Reish Mem Dal, the Bir Halacha goes with the poskim that Taka is a stira, and the halacha lamaisa is like Reish Mem Dal and Sif Dal, not like over here. So we're going that if it becomes mefursam, no matter why it's mefursam, whether it's minei ubei mefursam or becomes mefursam, if it's a lechem mefursam Shel Yisrael, then it's asur mikra din, period. So we're not going to go with that chiluk that I'm going to run. That's the way the Mishnah Berurah in Reish Mem Daled goes. The Shulchan Aruch Harav, so it's not so clear with him. He starts off like the Magen Avram's chiluk, and in the Kuntres Achron, he wants to say that maybe it depends on whether, again, like similar to what we said about the talis, if it's Shem Yisrael olav or not. It should be totally whether there's a clear Shem Yisrael on this malacha. He says an interesting thing. The Shulchan Aruch Rav brings in the name of the Sefer Chemdas Yisrael that what's called mefursam. How do you classify davar mefursam? So the Chemdas Yisrael wants to say it has to be something like we had a halacha before about a sfina. If a guy is building a sfina, a whole ship for Yisrael, that's a davar gadol mefursam. Only that's called davar mefursam, and that could be the chiluk between the cases, how mefursam it is. But because over here where it's davar mefursam, in Sif Gimel could be mefursam, but not as mefursam like a sfina, and therefore it's only usher b'tam chumrah. But the Shulchan Aruch Rav is cholik on that. It says mechatesi is tali and that kind of pearsum. It could be any beged that's obviously Shal Yisrael. That's also davar mefursam. There's no kaddish, there's no kedusha to a sfina dafka that should be the benchmark for mefursam. So basically, it comes out also over there lachoma, and so the Mishnah Berurah, one of the svoras that Shulchan Aruch wants to say, and Mishnah Berurah also in Sifkat and Chaf mentions this svora in the name of the Tosefes Shabbos, that maybe there's a possible teretz is that mefursam means not only that it's mefursam Shal Yisrael, it has to be mefursam Shal Yisrael zeh. It has to obviously belong to this Yisrael, which could be the pshat in the Chemdas Yisrael also, that everyone knows if Sfina is not just for Yisrael, everyone's going to know who that Sfina belongs to. It's not going to be just for Joe Schnoid down the street. It's going to be for Reichman, or for, it's going to be, it belongs to a Jew that would be building a Sfina. So, who had in any malacha, that it's only considered mefursam if it's for a particular Jew. He brings a second svora from the Chayaram that, and this is very practical for us, with the Chayaram, this is very nagea, that even if it's a davar mefursam, still, as long as it's the minig at Yadua in that place that everyone does it al yedei kabbalas, and nobody hires a schir yom to do it, but everyone does it through a kabbalas with katzatz. So then no one's going to have any chashash on this person, even though it's mefursam, that they hired him to do it on Shabbos, because there's no such thing. It's a minig to do it al yedei katzatz, and it's totally in the goy whatever he wants to do it. So the nafkamina will be in that, and the Mishnah Berurah brings out chayodim, will be bismanenu, if you bring your talis or your frock or something obviously Jewish to the cleaners, you bring your talis, you bring your challah cover, or your, something that they're going to hang up. They're going to do it on Shabbos and hang it. If they do it on Shabbos, they decide to, your katzatz and everything. Even though they do it, it's never enforced. Anybody walking by will see a talis being dry cleaned or washed, whatever, being hung up there. Still, it's mutter because everyone knows that every dry cleaners is through katzatz. There's no such thing as you're making him a shliach to do it.
So if there's a place that has Rov Yehudim, like every person, all the Jews go to this one dry cleaners, and does that mean you're not allowed to bring anything on a Friday afternoon? Because even if it's katzatz, you'll think it's going to be on Shabbat.
No problem. They can do it when they want to do it. As long as you didn't specify you're going to pick it up Motzei Shabbos, Or some might say this we didn't resolve yet, but if we bring it right before Shabbos and they only work on Shabbos, they don't work on Sunday. No cleaners work on Sunday. So if you say, so it could be that say I'm going to pick it up first thing, you open it 8 o'clock Monday morning, pick it up. I'll be there at 8 o'clock Monday morning. It could be that's also tantamount to saying for Shabbos. That wouldn't have a clear resolution on. But as long as you didn't do one of those things, you'll pick it up when you pick it up. Then it's adaited and nafshe. They can do what they want, and everyone knows it's katzatz adaited and nafshe. You didn't specify Shabbos, so then it could be all Jews in the city. It doesn't matter. They do it when they want to do it.
Just going back to the first case by the first answer of the Tosfos Shabbos, didn't we say by the kever that it's asur la'olam for every Jew?
That was not clear. No, we said it. No, we said just for that Jew and other Jews it's with mutar b'chtei shiyasu.
So that would fit into that shita, that as long as it's not for that specific Yisrael, then it would.
Okay. Yeah, there might be.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's with regards to Rishon Beis Sif Gimel. Now going on to Rishon Beis Sif Daled. So the Beis Yosef brings B'Shem the Ran. We spoke about this last time also, but we'll talk about it a little bit more now. The Beis Yosef brings the name of the Ran that by katzatz, let's say you give a guy leather to make for you shoes, and you didn't specify Shabbos or anything like that. You did everything right, but the guy finished it on Shabbos. He sends you a message, oh, your shoes are done. And he even sends you the shoes. They showed up on Shabbos. You know that you gave to him on Friday. He said, I'll pick up in a week. And the guy sends you a message with the shoes saying, I couldn't sleep last night. I decided to get up and do some work. So here, your shoes are ready. And I made them for you. So you need a pair of shoes. Can you wear them on Shabbos or not? They were done on Shabbos for you, but bofen shel heter. So Beis Yosef brings the Shem the Ran. It's the Ran in the sugya there that as long as it was katzatz, you're allowed to be nender from it because we said it's a daited nafshei of it, right? He's doing it for himself, not doing it for the Jew. But the Darkei Moshe, and that's the way the psak of the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Dalet that it says kol shekatzatz al v'shiyaseh any Yehudi melach b'Shabbos mutar liyisrael l'bo shekli b'Shabbos atzma the kol shekatzatz adaited and nasheka of it. Did it for himself, didn't do it for you. That's it was just like you had no avera by doing it on Shabbos because it was adaited and nafshe. Once it's adaited and nafshe, we already have a precedent to that. We know it's in the sugya kuchat beis. The goy lights a fire for himself completely, right? For the sake of the goy, and you have determinations what's considered for his own sake. Then a Jew can be nene even from the fire, the or, to read by the fire on Shabbos. If you walk into a goy's house and he lit lights on Shabbos, you can certainly be nene from those lights. So once it's a daited nafshei, he did it for himself. You can be nene just like the or. You can also be nene from the shoes that he made Shabbos, daited nafshei. But the Darkei Moshe brings down from the Maril, and the Bach brought down, the Beis Yosef itself brings shitas, but the Bach brought a whole long list of shitas that answer this, because they said that since Gufa Shel Yisrael, Nene me Gufa Malacha, like we saw in Tosfos and Kufat Beis, the Tosfos over there was Machalak between the case of Or and the case of Kibui, the Kuf Chafalach, the Gemara of Kibui over there that we said, the kol ha-mechabe enu mafsid, that was considered katzatz. So in both cases, the katzatz in there, and it's katzatz in Kufat Beis, also by Or, but the difference is that you're allowed to be nene from the kibui, when the guy put out the fire in your house, because you're not nene from the Gufa Yisrael is not nene from the Gufa Malacha, like the Ritva and the we saw the Ritva over there and the Chiddush Aran, that it's like just Meser Ari, it's just going to be Salik and Ari. But the house itself, you didn't create the house. Mashenken, or you're directly nene, your goof is nene from the or that he directly made. So then that you can't, even if it's katzas, doesn't say it's usher, and that's what the Sefer Truma and many Rishonim go with that mahalach. So that's the moral. The Darkei Moshe brings that from the Maril, and that's the psak of the Ramah. The Ramah here in Sif Dalet says, "Yesh osrim." L'lovsho, kol sheyaduah she'en Yehudi gama b'Shabbos, from the Maril, and yet, so what's the nukudas machlokas? And we have to understand what's shot in all those rishonim. L'chora, the Beis Yosef, the Ran, makes so much more sense because why is it different than lighting the or for the sake of himself? It's once it's daited in nafshei. So I think what you have to say is that there's a very clear chiluk, according to those Rishonim, that when we say a person, the goy is doing a daita denafshe, so if I will ask this goy, I give him leather, and I say, here, it's katzatz, I'm paying you by the job, so you're a kabbalan, and you're paying by the job, and he's doing it for, so we say daita denafshe. He's allowed to do it on Shabbos too, we don't care. However, if I go and ask this goy, excuse me, Timothy, who are you making these shoes for? He'll say, Yankel the Jew. Are you making them for yourself? No, I'm making them for the Yankel the Jew. So the actual malacha that's being done is clearly for the sake of the Jew. It's just that we have a heter on Shabbos that by making it a daita denafshe, it takes away the shlichus. It takes away the shlichus to say that he's my shliach doing on Shabbos. If, as long as I've set a reason that he doesn't have to do it on Shabbos, so mitzad the ma'aser Shabbos, mitzad the shlichus Shabbos Shabbos, then it's not considered any more my shlichus when it's a daita denafshe. In other words, we'll say like this, that there are really two dinim involved when it comes to Mir and the Nachim. We spoke about this a long, long time ago when we started the Kufaf Beis. We said that there are two separate dinim. There's a din of shlichus, there's a din of Amira La'akum. It's usher for etzem Amira La'akum to make him into either a shliach or maybe if you do it on Shabbos itself, you talk about it, it's mitzvah chefsach v'davar davar. But the ikar we're talking now mitzad the din shlichus shabo. And so that would call the Isra of Amira La'akum. Besides the Isra of Amira La'akum, we have a separate Isra, and this was the whole sugya in Kufkaf Beis, was the sugya of Hana from a malacha that was done for a Jew on Shabbos. Irregardless of the Amira La'akum, of the Shlichus Shabo, if a goy does a malacha, even without Shlichus, for a Jew on Shabbos, for the sake of a Jew, then a Jew can't be nended for that malacha on Shabbos. Two separate isurim. There's an isur of the Amira La'akum, and there's an isur of Hana from Malechas Akum on Shabbos. And on that we had shilas of Rashi and Tosas of Bechtei Shiyasu. Does it apply to Yom Tesheni or not? And how do we look at that as what's the shorish of the isur malacha of the isur Hana? Is it a gzera? Maybe we'll ask him to do more things, or is it just a dry isur Hana? That we discussed at great length back then. But the bottom line is, there's an Isra Hana to be nene for what a goy does for a Jew on Shabbos. So I think the Rishonim are going to be learning the following, that when we say daita denafshe, true, this takes away the Isra Shlichus. So the Jew is not being over an avera when the goy creates this thing or performs the malacha for the Jew on Shabbos. But sof kol sof, if I ask the goy who you doing this for, he's clearly performing this malacha for the hana of a Jew. So although we did away with the problem of shlichus, there's no isra amira la'akum on the gavra of the Jew, but mitzad the cheftza of what the goy does, mitzad the cheftza was being created, then it's a cheftza of a Isser Hana of an object that was created for the sake of a Jew on Shabbos. And that, like Tosa says, that like the or, that if what's the definition of how I can't be nana from it? If the Gufa Yisrael is nana from the Gufa Malacha, even though there was no Isser Shlichus Shabo, but that's considered Hana from what a goy did on Shabbos. So Bishlema, if it's a side Hana, which would be like, you're not really directly nana from it, which like kibui. Or the other corollary that was the previous simon we saw by igros. If a goy, as long as you do, you do katzatz and you make it into a kabbalan, so the goy delivers a letter on Shabbos. He's not doing it with your shlichus, and you're not directly being nana from gufa malacha to gufa Yisrael. It's a side benefit, so then that had no problem. You could be nana from that fact. Masha'en can, if you're directly nana, like from the or, so since the goy lights the or, if you did it with katzatz for the sake of the Jew, you're nene from it. Then you might not have an isser shlichus, but you do have an isser hana from gufa shemalacha, and that's what the Rishonim were saying over here. That if the goy sof kol sof made the shoes for the Jew, even without the shlichus, the shoes are still asar b'hana. So that's.
Would you need Would you need a wait kadesh yasu then in such an instance? Because now it's.
I'll pay you later for what you took the words out of my mouth. So that's the Gavalga Nafkamina, like we just said, that's my next line is that Nafkamina should be B'chtei Shiyasu. We have a machlokas over here that the Beis Yosef said that he brought down the Rokeach that said that whatever is done for Shabbos with katzatz is Asur B'chtei Shiyasu, and Beis Yosef was cholak on that. What kind of B'chtei Shiyasu? There was no Isser done over here, because the Beis Yosef goes with the Ran that there's no, that to the extent that the Ran Shita remains, that to the extent that we say Adaita and Nafshe, if just like it worked for Shlichus, it didn't work with Etzem Malacha. It's considered Adaita and Nafshe across the board. At least for this Isser Rabbanan. True, you might ask the Goy, who are you doing this for? I might say the Jew, but the Maisa, that's more of an emotional thing. But there's a halacha dik, we say that it's called a daita nafshe. So if it's done by derech heter, there's no isser being done, then there's no isser b'tei shiyasu. But the Ramah brings, the Darkei Moshe brings down, and that's the psaka of the Ramah, that there is an isser b'tei shiyasu, because since sof kol sof the etzem object is asabana, according to the Shittas Rashi Taka in the Sugya, then the Isur B'tei Shiyasu is not to be nene from Melech Shabbos, includes not only from Shabbos itself, but to the extent after Shabbos you would have taken to do it. If that amount of time is not gone by, that's still considered being nene from Melech Shabbos. And therefore the Psak of the Ramah is that it's Asur also B'tei Shiyasu. But each one l'shitaso in this shiloh. It's very geschmack. So now the Magen Avram, just to finish this off, the Magen Avram in Sivkot Yad Aleph raises another question that the Dasa Shulchan Aruch, that seems to be a stira to, if he says it's mutter over here, the Shulchan Aruch says that what's done on Shabbos for the sake of the Jew is mutter. So, but in Reish Ayin Vav, the Gabi Ner, and the Sugi of Kufat Beis by Ner, there, the Shulchan Aruch Aser, he didn't, even if it was Katzatz, Shulchan Aruch said it's Aser, like Tosfos. So it seems to be holding the rope at both ends. Here he's passing like the Ran, over there by Or, he's passing like Tosfos. So that's a problem with the Shulchan Aruch. So the Magen Avram says of Shat, Magen Avram in Yud Aleph says that the difference is that when by Or, you're going to be nene achshav mihaner. You're going to be nene right now from the ner. Meaning, so what exactly does that mean? It's not so clear what he means, but there's another Magen Avram in Shin Lamed Daled Sivkot and Chaf Zayin. He explains a little further what he means, and he says that by Or, you're not allowed to be nene from the Gufa Or, even when it's a daita nafshe. He says, Hoil va'ako miskaven lahanoso. Since the goy is nene, he's mechaven when he lights the Or for the hanos Yisrael. So if you put that together, those words of the Magen Avram together with our Magen Avram, you come up with a complete picture that the goy, if he has kavana, let's say he made the shoes. So he made the shoes and he finished them on Shabbos. So he doesn't care whether the Jew wears them on Shabbos or not. His kavana wasn't the Jew needs to wear them on Shabbos. Just once he finished it, he sent it to the Jew and he can do what he wants to. But when you light a ner, so that for sure the kavana is not to be ner from it later. Later it won't be in ner. By Motzei Shabbos, the ner is going to be burnt out. So clearly the kavana of the goy is for the Jew to be nena not only in general, but to be nena now on Shabbos. And that makes it even more clear that the mitzad, the maisa of the goy, mitzad klapi the hana, the be nena from what the goy did, it's much more chamor, because the miyad, the immediacy, makes it that the kavanas hagoy is for sure lahanos Israel. It takes it a lot more out of the daita nafshe mitzad the hanoshavos. Even though technically there's still not an isser shlichus per se, but there's more of a tzad to be asur b'hana, and that'll be a yishuv to the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is sort of being machriya it comes out that he's not straight. He passes like the Ran over here, but it doesn't mean he passes like the Ran across the board. I mean, the teretz, the Ran himself, to answer Tosa's kasha, why is there chiluk between kibui or not? The Ran will learn that the sugin kuchlaf beis that Asas or is talking about was not katzatz. So according to the Ran himself, even or is mutter when it's katzatz. That's what the Ran holds. But it seems like the Shulchan Aruch is sort of making a pshara over here. L'gabe hana, that's going to be general hana. He's passing like the Ran, where it's not. There's no immediacy to the hana on Shabbos. There's still elements of daita de nafshe. So he's passing that the Ran svara is good by orus, l'avdon, and things like that. But by light, where there's an immediacy to the hana, and the goy is clearly doing for the Yisrael to be nana right now on Shabbos. So that. Then with that he goes to Tosfos. We say that you can't be nene from the gufa davar. That's very geschmack. So and when it comes to the or, so then that the Magen Avraham says that his ikar govanah is not to be nene right now. He just wanted to do it now. Lahashlim pulasoi. He wanted to benefit from the fact that he's be done with that work. He can go on to the next job. So to finish the shoes is not called directly hana for the Yisrael. It's called lahashlim pulasoi. He's coming to finish up his own benefit, to be done with that work, to go on to the next work, to the next job. Now, the Mishnah Berurah wants to say, according to this Magen Avraham, he brings from the Pri Megadim, Mishnah Berurah and Chaf Zayin, says that according to this, if the Yisrael says to the goy before Shabbos, hey, why didn't you finish my beged already? I wanted to wear that. So the goy says, oh, okay, I'll hurry up and finish it, so you can have it by tomorrow, by Saturday morning. So if that exchange happened, then clearly the goy is doing it for the sake of the Yisrael to be nena on Shabbos. So then it'll be like or. Then it'll be also even according to the Shulchan Aruch, because then the svara we said for the Ran will not apply anymore. You follow? Because the goy is clearly doing it for the Jew to be nena from it on Shabbos. There's another Mishnah Berurah in Shin Zion, Siman Shin Zion, the Sharet Zion Yud Zion. We learned this before. The Mishnah Berurah over there in Tesvav brings machlokes the Taz and the Achronim by if you could be nene from what a goy buys for you on Shabbos. If you gave him money to buy something, your katzatz to make him, he's a purchasing agent for you, and he bought something for you on Shabbos. So you didn't tell him to do it on Shabbos. But but he did it on Shabbos anyway. It was katzatz. Are you allowed to be nene from that or not? So he wants to say that the reason those that are matir, the Taz says asur and the others are matir. He says the reason of those that are matir is based on this Shulchan Aruch over here, based on the Ran. That as long as it was katzatz, you can be nene from what the goy did for you on Shabbos. You didn't specifically tell him to do it on Shabbos. And maybe even according to the Ramah that asered it, that's cholik, maybe the Ramah is only chasering when a malacha deraisa was done, like he made for you shoes or something like that. That's a malacha deraisa. But by just purchasing, which is only an issur d'Rabbanan, perhaps the Ramah would agree that it's mutter. And like the Magen Avraham himself in Tafkuf Tesvav Gimel discusses this chiluk between deraisa and d'Rabbanan. So this could be a possible chiluk. But Mishnah Berurah wants to say, though, that perhaps if what the goy bought was mini Michael, he bought food for you, then it should be asur l'kuli alma, because food is bought for the sake of being nana right now. That's the way the Sharet Zion brings down. Now, this question about food, the Magen Avraham himself that is quoting in Shin Zion has a suffix about it, that maybe food clearly is for being hana. They didn't have refrigerators like today. So it's clearly for hana today, or maybe still, or is obviously for today. Food could last till after Shabbos, so it's not so clearly and obviously for the sake of hana right now. So the Magen Avraham himself is dubious about the halacha of food as opposed to or. But the Mishnah Berurah that brings it down this way, he's being machriya, the suffix of the Magen Avraham, to say that what is clearly for Shabbos, even food will be like or, and therefore it would be asur. Okay, there's more to talk about, but I think we'll go off of this now because just want to speak briefly about the new sugya that we're getting into now. So talk a little bit about it. The sugya, and so that completes pretty much what we're talking about in Rishon and Beis. And now getting to Rishon and Hey, that we have the sugya of Avodah Zarah, which this past week, we'll talk about it more next time, Hashem, but the sugya in Chaf Beis, we're just going to go through it briefly and try to talk about a couple of nakudas here. Let's just briefly go through the sugya. Chaf Beis Amud Aleph in Avodah Zarah. Hanu Morei Kai doesn't mean Moroccans. Let's see, take one look. It means Hanu Morei Kai is those are people who plant karkum. They plant I forgot how to say it in English. Karkum is
Saffron.
Pardon?
Saffron or turmeric.
Turmeric.
Saffron or turmeric.
Yeah, turmeric, right. Actually, it is a very common Sephardi stock, so maybe it is Moroccans. And turmeric, they put it in everything. So this Marikoi, Obik Noka B'Shabsa, Yisrael B'Shabsa. We have a shutaf over here, that the Jew and a goy are shutaf in the field, and they set it up now that the goy is going to work on Shabbos, and the Jew for them, and the Jew will make up for it by working on Sunday. Generally, they work together. They split up, or they split up the work, but they're making a clear delineation that the goy is going to work on Shabbos and the Jew is going to work on Sunday. Asula Kameda Rava Sharolahu. So Rava said that's good. It's mutter. Eisve Ravina Rava. Frekt Ravina from a Brisa Yisrael B'Kachavim Shekibu L'Sada B'Shutfas. Lo Yomar Yisrael B'Kachavim Tal Chelkacha B'Shabbos Ani B'Chol. That you cannot establish this set up this way that the goy is going to work on Shabbos and you work on Sunday. You can't tell him that. Take your chelik on Shabbos, I'll take my chelik on Yom Chol. But if they made a t'nai, if they set up the partnership that way to begin with, that's the way they established the partnership, then it's mutter. And we'll see what that means, Bo'al l'cheshbon, well, to talk about that afterwards. But if they made a cheshbon afterwards, then it becomes asur again, even though it's hisnu b'tchila mutter. But if they came and made a cheshbon and they're going to work out something like, let's say the Jew will get more on Sunday, Lumas, what happened on Shabbos, then that's asur. Ichsif. So then Rava was embarrassed by this kasha. He got slugged up by this kasha. The sof iglay milsa de hishnami karahava. It can't be that Rava made a mistake. Rava doesn't make mistakes. So it was this gala that his psak conformed with this brisa, even though he didn't realize it, because they taka made it t'nai meikara. They already made it t'nai to begin with, and that made it okay. So that's one shot in what happened with the mice with Rava. Okay. And just say, it can't be that he made a mistake. There's a mice with Ramosha, and there's a Ramosha Feinstein that's all. It's a long mice, but just it's kadadi. I don't know if you've heard this mice. It's Kavalga mice. It's in writing that a woman who went through the Holocaust and her husband, she said she had a psak that her husband died in the war, and she got remarried, and she lived in South Africa, and she had a whole family, and then one day her husband showed up. Her previous husband showed up. So now what do you do with all these kids? If she's in a nusa, then they're mamzerim. They're not mamzerim. If she's fashas, then they're mamzerim. Huge, horrible questions. So they flew to her Moshe. And Moshe said, tell me the story. And she told the whole story. She was weeping and everything in the camps, and her husband died. And she spoke to a certain Rav in the DP camps afterwards, certain Gadol, and that Gadol said it's mutter to get married, and she got married, and all this happened. So Moshe paced the floor back and forth for a while, and then he said, uncharacteristically, he said, tell it again. Everybody was shocked. And she told the whole story again, weeping, crying, and she went to this Gadol and Paskin and this and this and this. And Moshe was pacing the floor, and then he went back a third time and said, tell it again. And she told it again. Everybody was completely shocked. They told it again. And then, so finally Moshe turned to her and said, I knew that gadol that you said Paskin that for you. And I don't come to his ankles and his godless and Torah and Yerushalayim. And I've Paskin thousands of agunas since the war and never Chas Shalom made a single mistake. There's no way that Hashem would allow this gadol to make a mistake in this. So then she burst out crying again. She said, actually, she didn't really ask that him. He was just in the camp, and she never really got a psak. And so she just assumed it's okay, and she was just using his name because he probably would have said it's okay. So there's no, Moshe was, he had to hear it again and again. There's no way that Hashem will allow such a gadol to make such a mistake. So Rava over here, Rava was ichsif. He was embarrassed by the kasha. Then it came out that really the psak was right because it was already hisnei mikara. So then Havarav Kavia Mebeksil Amar Hanush Stile Dar Loy Hava. It wasn't a case of Shabbos like that of partners, and it wasn't partners in Shabbos. It was partners in Orla. There was a field of Orla. The first 3 years the fruit is Orla. Only the fourth year on there's a heter to bring it to Yerushalayim, or maybe it was even Orla D'Rabbanan. So the first 4 years, they bought it jointly, and they said that, and then they made up afterwards that the goy will work the field the years of Orla, and he'll eat the fruits while they're Orla. And the Jew will take it the following years and work and make up for that, and eat it when it's mutter. Also, look at the Rava and Charlotte, he mattered it. We had a kasha from that other brisa. Said no, it wasn't a kasha. It was he came to bring a riot to him, not a kasha on him. It's only on Elser and Shabbos. It would be mutter by Orla. By Ichsif, what about he was ashamed? La Adam, lo yadvar me'olam. It never happened. So the whole story was a completely different story. Okay. So now ending off the sugya, we'll come back to everything obviously. Iboilahu stama amai. What if you didn't make a tanai, but you also didn't appoint them to work that way? Like the case was to begin with, that they just entered a partnership. After they entered into it, then they said to each other, the Yisrael said to the goy, you work on Shabbos and I work on Sunday. That's where we asered. That's where we said it's aser. And we have to know exactly why it's aser as well. But that's what it's aser. What if they didn't say anything? They just did that. Just the goy worked on Shabbos and he worked on Sunday without appointing him that way. Toshma im hishnu mitchila mutter. So you have a raya that you have to make a tanai dafka. Without a tanai, it's aser. Hastama aser. Im a sefer. What about you can a diuk for carrot? An opposite diuk. Imbo lecheshman aser. Hastama mutter. You see that it's only aser if you make baba cheshman. If you cheshman out Shabbos to equally split in the profits of Shabbos, only that is aser. But if it was stam, they didn't do that. It should be mutter. You have no raya from here. There's no raya from these diukim. There's no raya. Okay, so now we can clear a elemental shaila in this whole isser that we have in the beginning of the sugya. That what is the problem over here? What is the problem when you set up for the goy is going to work on Shabbos, you're going to work on Sunday? So is it because you're being nene from what the goy is doing on Shabbos? It's an isser hana, like we've been talking about it till now. It becomes he's being nene, he's working, and I'm somehow being nene for the fact that he's working on Shabbos. Or even if there's no actual hana from it, but by the goy working on Shabbos and me working on Sunday, since we both are really supposed to be working every day, so it's really mutal. It's upon the Jew to work on Shabbos too. So when I ask the goy to work in my stead, then he's a shliach to do it for me, because it's really something that I'm supposed to be doing. So then Isser is an Isser shlichus on Shabbos. So the two dinim that we spoke about just in the previous sif, and we've been talking about it all along, whether the problem is an Isser hana from the Lachas Akum, or the problem is shlichus, is a problem Amir Lakum, which is shlichus. So we can clear that shaila of what is the yesod of the problem over here in this sugya. When we now enter a new parsha of shlichus, in which category does this fall? Does it fall in the category of Isser Hana on Shabbos, or Isser Shlichus of Amir La'akum on Shabbos? So this question seems to be a machlokas in Tosfos. That we had the Tosfos said that brings down a Maisa in the days of Rabbeinu Tam that a goy owed some money to Yisrael, and he didn't have any money to pay, so he gave him half of his tanur. So now the tanur is now jointly owned b'shutfus between the goy and the akum in Yisrael. Sorry, so and now so the goy is going to get a certain number of days they have the baker that's working over there, and the goy gets certain days of profit, and the Jew gets certain days of profit. And they did not make a t'nai mitchila that Shabbos belongs only to the goy, exclusively to the goy. So they were not hishnu mitchila. And our Gemara says that hishnu mitchila, it's aser. So the Ri wanted to say that it's not a problem. When do you need hishnu mitchila? That's dafka by a field. Besides the profit of the field, there's a hana from the fact that the field is being worked, is being plowed or worked or whatever has to be done to the field on Shabbos. So then there's an overall hana to the Jew who's a part owner in the field, that the field is being nishtabach, is becoming better and more quality or being more worked on what's in Shabbos. You're getting hana from that in Shabbos, and that's why you need hishnu mitchila. Hishnu mitchila somehow it overrides the fact that you're being nene from what happens on Shabbos, because it just doesn't belong to you at all. So the goy is, if you hishnu mitchila, it makes it that it belongs solely to the Jew, to the goy on Shabbos. The Tanai is not just a Tanai, but it really specifies the ownership of it in each day. It splits up the ownership. That the days that it belongs to the goy, it belongs solely to the goy. The days it belongs to the Jew, it belongs solely to the Jew. That's what the Tanai will be doing. So that's why, even though you're nene from, the Jew will be nene from it overall, but since the day that the goy was mashbiach the sadeh, made it better, was a day that he was the sole owner of it, then there was no issue.
Can't you say that there's a hana that by the Yisrael knowing that the guy is going to use that day as his day, it opens up a whole second day, an extra day for the Yisrael to use it? Why is that not hana that he's being nene that one of the days the guy is taking is Shabbos, and now he doesn't have to worry about losing that day?
Well, if hishnu mitchila, it's directing the ownership. It's defining the ownership. So you can be nene. I can be nene from a lot of things, from goyim that own things out there that have nothing to do with me.
No, but that's hishnu mitchila. But by the oven, if according to the read that he didn't make it tonight.
So he says that there's no shevach be'etzem and the etzem tanur. There could be side benefit, but there's no hana from the etzem tanur.
This is like the guf of the Maisa.
Right. It's not like, because again, when we're talking about Isser Hana, we're talking about that to be nene from the cheftza of a davar shel some kind of hana shel Shabbos, and since that's not the case because you're not the owner in Shabbos, so then I'm sorry. In this case, even without hishnu mitchila, since you're not going to be nene directly from the tanur, from any shevach that was chal in the tanur, then there's no issue with that. That's what the Ri held. And Rabbi Tam is cholek and says no, there's no chiluk, because sof kol sof, even if you're not mashbiach the tanur, but since it was mutal on these, there was no t'nai mitchila, it was mutal on the Yisrael also to be work on the tanur or be'etzivis to get enough from the tanur on Shabbos. So then it comes out that whatever is done on Shabbos is b'shlichus Yisrael. It's all b'shlichuso. So it comes out that our shiloh that we asked in the sugya is really telling this machlokus, the Ri and Rabbeinu Tam. According to the Ri, the getter Isser over here is an Isser Hana. And so we always look at that question. And according to Rabbeinu Tam, it's a question of shlichus. That's really the getter of the sugya over here. I just want to say that we're a little bit late now, but Rashi clearly is learning throughout the entire sugya like Rabbeinu Tam. If you look carefully at Rashi, so Rashi says throughout the entire sugya, step by step, he spells out again and again. He says over here in the Rashi Dimachsel Shekiblu, when they accepted it by Arisis and the Balabais, is Hutal Shneim, it was mutan on both of them to work together. So he says, don't tell it, you sure can't say, you take your chelik and Shabbos. Says Rashi, and the half a day, or like, how we split that half a day, throughout the entire day, you become the shliach on the chelik of the Israel. But Rashi says in Hishim Mitchila, before you're matal on him, mutter, why da'alo kibal le Yisrael avodah de Shabbos? The Yisrael was never makabel avodah Shabbos to begin with. Ve'eno v'kachavim shluchai. Mele is not your shliach. But then he says in Bo L'Cheshbon, so Rashi learns in Bo L'Cheshbon, this is Machlokes Hashonim. Rashi learns Bo L'Cheshbon is going off of Hishnu. It's not going back on Hishnu. It's low Hishnu. It's a separate thing. That if they're makabel stam, it's going on the case of stam, and they did it stam, and nobody really set up anything. And the Yisrael was never told them to do it on Shabbos. So then there's no problem with shlichus at this point. But he says, but they make a cheshbon afterwards, then it's also, Rashi says, the schar Shabbos unotel, the gali daito da'ova kacham shlucha haya. Then it's a gilui das, once you're ba'al cheshbon, then even though you didn't make him a shliach before by saying it, but now by making a cheshbon, it's a gilui das that all along he was really your shliach, because otherwise you wouldn't deserve half of what he did. So the cheshbon gives you, the Jew, half, then retroactively you're megale that he was your shliach. So Rashi puts it again into the category of shlichus. Just on that Rashi, there's a big ha'ara I don't really have a good answer for, but that Rashi, why does Rashi have to say schar Shabbos? Just say shliach. Why does Rashi have to insert a new problem of schar Shabbos into that? So, well, something to think about. I don't have a good answer for that. We've thought a lot about it. And then Rashi goes on, and the Rashi holds that there's, by Orla, the reason Orla is okay is because it's mutter, because there's no problem with shlichus by Orla. Rashi says, in Rashi, der maslo sharlahu, why by Orla is it okay? Ein kan iser shlichus. Why? Because Yisrael also is allowed to work on an Orla field, you just can't eat the fruit. So there's only iser shlichus of something Yisrael himself can't do. But there's no iser shlichus, something that Yisrael could do, and he has to go and do it for him. So since there's no problem with shlichus, there's no problem, period. So, because Rashi, the whole sugya is about shlichus. And then at the end, Rashi says, we had a tiyufta on Ravina. Ravina had a tiyufta on Rabbah. And so he says, Rashi says, Imken, my tiyufta, Gabi Shabbos, Isser Shlichus Malacha, Mashenkin Ba'orla. What's the kasha from Shabbos to Orla? One has an Isser Shlichus and one doesn't. Because again, Rashi is all about Shlichus. And then he says, no, it's only a siyua. Rashi says, Midiktani hisnu utchila muter alma kilik Isser Shlichus the Malacha Shari. I've got the Matya Hanol Yisrael who did in the Orla. That if he's Messiah him, that if there was hisnu utchila, then since it was never mutal on Israel, then by Shabbos also there's no problem with shlichus. Mele, it's similar to Orla. And the Rashi ends off that by Stam, it's okay, but in Bo L'Cheshbon, then Rashi ends off, Hisker le Yisrael shel Shabbos b'osa chalukah, the Gala daita de shlucha havi. So Rashi doesn't miss a beat. Any possible line of the Gemara, they actually could. He puts in, he makes sure to put in. You don't forget the problem over here is a problem of shlichus. So it's a problem of so the isser. It's not a sort of isser hana like the Ri said, and actually Tosafos says that Ri was choser afterwards, and then it's like Rashi, like Rabbeinu Tam. He brought a ride to Rabbeinu Tam, so he was choser. So really, we don't have anybody over here that's not learning this on the page. That's not learning beside isser shlichus. So the bottom line is the sugya of shutfas is a problem of mamana the goy my shutaf is shliach to do my work on Shabbos, and hisna mitchila takes it out of the realm of shlichus by making it not be mutal on me, and therefore he's doing it adaita de nafshe, he's doing it for himself. It's his own. It's either his own work or his own field for that day. There's a lot more to talk about over here, but we're out of time, so we'll finish up. We'll continue next time and we'll have Santa Marmakumas to. We have over the Rush and the Ron, and some more final Nakudas here on the Gemara. We'll talk about Shem next time. So okay, Shabbos, and well, I'll just end off with one Misa. I'll tell you that we have the second half of Kabbalah Torah this week. So these are Chashav weeks. We have split Kabbalah Torah between Parshas Yisro and Parshas Shpatim. We have Nasa V'Nishma. There's so much to talk about. There's no end to what there's to talk about. I'll just tell you a little thing that I thought of last week, and maybe there's no time for the Misa right now, but that's a long Misa. I'll upon him that why of all weeks, of all Parshias, which a Parsha be named after a Goy, Parshas Yisro. Parshas of Kabbalah Torah, let it be Parshas Moshe, let it be, I don't know, Parshas Anania Kavod, Parshas something, Parshas Yisro of all things. So what I was thinking was that, and Amy Shivan al Adrish, so you can, say your own shot also, that it bothered me for many years, but it certainly struck me that it says later on in the Midbar, when Yisro was leaving, Moshe Rabbeinu asked him, please stay with us. Stay with us. You'll be for us as our eyes. Did we talk about this last time? No? Okay, maybe not. So, all right, you should be our eyes. And obvious questions, we need, Klal Yisrael needed Yisro to be their Einayim. They had Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron HaKohen, Anania Kavod, they had Eish Laila, they had Mon, they had everything. They have a Shechina. They need Yisro to be their Einayim. What are they? So Weinberger from the Eish Kodesh Shul, I heard his name, and then afterwards I spoke to him about it. He said a beautiful thing. He said that, it said and by Parshas Yisro it says that Vayichad Yisro, when Moshe was telling him over all things that happened, Vayishma Yisro, what did he hear? What did he hear that caused him to come? So different days in Chazal, either Mechamas Amalek or Yamsuf, or even Kabbalah Torah. So when he came in and he was being told about these things, it says Vayichad Yisro. So Targum says he was joyous. So the different Lashonos Yichad is Nasa Besara Chedudim. So different reasons why he became full of goosebumps. One shot is because he was just so overjoyed and so overtaken and just so spoiled from what he heard that he got filled with goosebumps. Yichad Yisro. So the question is, if Yichad Yisro, obviously nobody else did, because the Torah would have said they all got full of Yichad everybody. What about the goosebumps of even Moshe Rabbeinu and everybody else when they heard these things? They actually saw these things. He's just hearing about it. So the answer is that we see that they already became a little bit old for them. They already, it's something they already knew about. They heard about it already. For Yisro, it's a fresh kite. It's new. It's fresh. And Yisro had that. Moshe saw in Yisro that he had that koach within him to keep things fresh. That's really the tachlis of the way we're supposed to keep the entirety of Torah. There it says that B'yom hazeh bo bin bar Sinai. Rashi says B'yom hazeh you kol yamecha ki'ilo hayom nitnu. And that Rashi says in Parshas Kriyas Shema, Hayom alav avecha, that it should be like it was given you today on your heart. That's our biggest challenge, but that's what keeps Torah alive, is that there's constant frischkeit. There's constant. We saw that. If you ever heard any of we just lost Rebbe Shiners. That's all. 98 years old, but you see him speaking from 90 years old and past that. Imam speaks as if he's like a 25-year-old. The simcha and the frischkeit and the geschmack and everything, the way he talks, Imam is like a young, fresh, new person starting to learn. Even though he's talking like that for 90, he was 98 years old. The Gedolim, you see that they lived in that realm. So what Moshe was asking Yisro is, don't leave, stay with us. You should be our eyes. We should see what we have through your eyes, that it should always remain fresh by us. We should be able to see that freshness, what we have, and it should never get old for us. That's what he was asking him. So perhaps that's why it's called Parshas Yisro, that Kabbalah Torah Dafka, we need to keep, Torah has to be, We have to learn Torah like it was given at Har Sinai. Mavas Sinai, Gemara says in Brachos, Be'ema B'yira Resus B'ziyah. Also, Af Ata, Be'ema B'yira Resus B'ziyah. We have to learn it. That's why there's a mitzvah deraisa of remembering Har Sinai and not forgetting it. It's remember every single day. One of the 6 schiros is to remember Ma'amad Har Sinai, not just to remember that it once was given at Har Sinai. Asher Nasal Nanos Tarasa. At that moment, you're supposed to remember the whole Ma'amad Har Sinai and stop and think for a minute. Baruch Atah Hashem, no said in Torah, present tense, because it remains Sinai. It has to continue to be Sinai with that freshness, with that geschmack. And so that's part of that mitzvah. Just, Rav Wolbe once was speaking by Richus about this mitzvah and how Gedolei Yisrael, like the Ramban says in Sefer Mitzvahs, Vaya enecha v'libcha sham kol hayamim. The mitzvah is that your eyes and your heart should be there all your days. And Gedolei Yisrael walked around with a picture of Har Sinai in front of them 24/7, he said. So, and he spoke about a mural he saw once. He was at a wealthy home in Tel Aviv and saw a beautiful mural on the wall. Someone paid a lot of money to have a whole depiction of Har Sinai. And he looked at it for a long time, and it was ma'or him to remember Har Sinai. So that got me going, and I tried to hire, in those days in the 80s, one of the new Russians that came over to try to hire someone to paint me Ma'amad Har Sinai. And every day in Ben Esdarim and Mir Yeshiva, a different Russian came with their stuff to show me their wares, and I couldn't find anything I really liked. And I was at a friend of mine's house, and I saw beautiful pictures across the wall. I thought, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Who painted these pictures? My little sister. Wow. So let me talk to her. So she came out, and I said, would you be willing to, I'll pay you and everything, and I'll bring you all the marmakonos. And so she said, of course, I'd love to. So I told another friend of mine who was a big Talmid Chacham, and he started arguing with me and said, you can't do that. You can't paint Har Sinai. You can't shrink it like that. I said, what do you mean? Rav Wolbe talked about he didn't tell you to do it. He just told you he was inspoiled from it. So I challenged you to go to Rosh Zalman. So I took the challenge, and I went into Rosh Zalman. I said, Rosh Shiva, the Ramban, the mitzvah is Chiras Ma'amad Har Sinai. He says, no. Okay, I knew it's already not going well. I got a little nervous already. I said, well, I had an idea to hire somebody to mekayim this mitzvah to paint a picture of Har Sinai, and I'll give all the marmakonos and all things. So I'll say happened over there. And so he blew up at me and said, you can't take Har Sinai and put it onto a canvas, onto paper. You can't shrink it down like that. It's a musag ruchni that you have to have in your mind's eye, and you have to live with it like that. But you can't put it down on paper. So, but Rosh Zalman was saying, but you need to live with it, like Rav Wolbe said. Just you can't shrink it down. So that's our mitzvah. That's why the Torah depicts it in such great detail that we have to every single morning we say Brachas Torah, Shanasal Manos Tarasa, to think of Har Sinai, remember it, and then the learning we do the rest of the day should be a different kind of learning. It would be learning Har Sinai. Okay. Have a good Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos.